Welcome to Inside the Mask, the podcast where we cover off all your favorite horror movies with a true crime twist. It's April Fool's Day, and we'll be taking on a subgenre spoof that I've been wanting to do ever since the launch of this podcast. It's the story of a group of teenagers who, after a violent series of murders targeting local youths, find themselves pursued by a masked killer. And before the case would come to its eventual conclusion, revelations would be uncovered regarding the killer's potential connection to the victims and a secret that might not have stayed buried after all. I'm your host, Evan Taggart, and this is Scary Movie. It's Halloween night in the year 2000, and in an otherwise quiet suburb of a small town, Stevenson County, police respond to reports of a body located near an upscale residence on the outskirts of town. Now, when police arrive at the scene, foul play is immediately suspected, and it doesn't take long for investigators to officially declare the scene a homicide. The body is formally identified by first responders as teenage female Drew Decker, who was reportedly home alone for the evening as her parents were away at a social event. Now, Drew was killed by vicious stab wounds to her upper torso, one of which almost fatally pierced her heart, but was, in a bizarre stroke of luck, seemingly thwarted by a surgical breast implant that stopped the blade from penetrating her heart. And yes, that actually is documented in the official police report and autopsy. Now, while the house seems to show no immediate signs of forced entry here, investigators make another startling find upon searching the grounds. A male individual, seemingly held captive and bound to a chair, is located at the rear of the home. This male victim, who is unidentified in police reports, claims in witness statements to have been another victim of the killer in question, who was kidnapped by the assailant, though miraculously was left alive in the ordeal. Police are able to subsequently clear this person from any suspected involvement in the murder, and in the process, he's able to provide a description of the killer, dressed in all black with a stark white, almost ghost-faced mask. Now, the Stevenson County killing spree had a plethora of suspects during the course of the investigation. The majority of the murder victims in the case were high school students, many of which were close friends. The individuals thought to have been the principal targets of the masked killer are identified in reports as female victims Cindy Campbell, Brenda Meeks, and Buffy Gilmore, as well as male victims Bobby Prinz, Ray Wilkins, and Greg Felipe. Now, some of these future victims were at least at one point considered by police to have been potential suspects in the case, including most notably Greg Felipe and Bobby Prinz, the latter of which we'll get to shortly. Now, Greg was briefly investigated after witnesses on site at the victim's campus, which was identified as B.A. Corpse High School, suggested that Greg had often exhibited aggressive and sometimes violent behavior towards other students, and most notably future survivor Cindy Campbell. However, a tragic event would ultimately cause a tonal shift in the case when Greg himself would simply disappear. During a local talent show featuring his then-girlfriend and future victim Buffy Gilmore, it was reported to police by Gilmore herself that she had seemingly witnessed Greg being murdered on the top-floor balcony overlooking the stage. She describes Greg as being approached by a white masked killer who proceeded to brutally stab Greg a number of times before ultimately and horrifically slashing his throat. However, when investigators examine the alleged crime scene, they find no evidence at all. There's no blood, there's no signs of a struggle, and most notably, no Greg Felipe. Greg's body was never actually formally recovered by police, and while he was considered a suspect at the time, suggesting that he possibly had seemingly disappeared in order to just stalk the other victims in the case undetected, the eventual reveal of the actual killer in question lead police to believe that Greg was actually killed as described by victim Buffy Gilmore. And while at this point investigators seemingly have nothing more to go on, no solid suspects and no body of the purported victim, it wouldn't take long for the case to once again take a turn. It's during this time that authorities receive another alert from a potential victim, and it comes in the form of an online ping from the Campbell residence on the outskirts of town, the same location that would prove to be the most brutal of final crime scenes in the days to come. Now, dispatch received this alarm, triggered by a website interaction from victim Cindy Campbell, during the late hours of the evening, and when authorities respond to the home where the ping was originating, they make two breaks in the case itself. The first would tragically result in the discovery of another body, an elderly female who was unnamed in police reports but suggested to be the possible biological grandmother of Cindy Campbell. Her remains were located at the bottom of the staircase leading to the second floor of the home, having seemingly been crushed under the weight of a rolling piano. Forensics suggest that the piano was likely pushed down from the top of the stairs by the killer, where it may have fatally collided with the elderly woman at the bottom, resulting in her own death. And as police secure the property, they find Cindy Campbell in an upstairs bedroom, only at the time, she was not alone. Cindy's then boyfriend, Bobby Prinz, was also in attendance, and upon questioning and detaining Bobby, investigators find potential evidence implicating him in this series of crimes. Bobby was found to have numerous suspect items on his person, including what's documented in reports as a cell phone, leather gloves, and, probably the most implicating, a hunting knife. And despite his claims of innocence here, Bobby Prinz was arrested ultimately for trespassing and for suspicion of murder, where he was taken into police custody at Stevenson County Sheriff's Department in town. Now, in a move that was highly controversial, it didn't take long for police to completely exonerate Bobby Prinz as a potential suspect, and this came after the revelation that Cindy Campbell had reportedly received a threatening phone call from the, quote, real killer, all on the evening that Bobby himself was in jail. Now, the main source of controversy here falls at the hands of the Stevenson County Sheriff's Department, wherein, after the case eventually concluded, a police watchdog unit was brought in to examine the quality of police work during the case. The investigation was led by the local lead sheriff as well as a special constable, identified in reports as Doofy Gilmore, the elder sibling of future victim Buffy Gilmore, who reportedly had an intellectual disability. Now, it's noted here that the Stevenson County Sheriff himself seemed to almost not take the case seriously for the majority of the investigation, most notably during a public press conference that took place during the early stages of the case, wherein the officer in question displayed a blatant disregard for the murdered victims. Additionally, at no point did the investigator seem to consider the possibility that there might have been more than one killer, and that it was more than possible and also probable that Bobby Prinz was still involved in some shape or form. Still, Bobby was released from prison, and it would prove to be a decision that would have deadly results, though not necessarily in the way that one might be thinking. While the body of the next victim would only be recovered in parts, and not until much later in the investigation upon her discovered disappearance, it's considered that the next chronological victim of the Stevenson County killer was Buffy Gilmore. Witnesses attending B.A. Corpse High School reported a foul odor in one of the locker rooms on campus, and after executing a search therein, staff would make a horrifying discovery. Concealed in a trash bin within the locker room was Buffy Gilmore's severed head. As police secure the crime scene here, they locate multiple blood samples matching that of the victim on nearby surfaces of the room, including both the floors and on the walls, though it's suggested in investigation notes that the killer might have actually tried to clean this area with chemicals to prevent the discovery of the crime. Now, interestingly, investigators found similar traces of chemicals at the crime scene where Greg Felipe was allegedly killed, suggesting now that the same killer was likely responsible for both disappearances and potential subsequent murders. As the investigation would progress, 3 more locals would famously disappear, one of which was a high school student identified in reports as Heather, as well as a local news crew team consisting of prominent and albeit controversial reporter Gail Hailstorm and her camera operator Kenny. And in a chilling turn of events, the entire murder was caught on camera. In tapes obtained as evidence by police, local Storm 6 news camera operator Kenny managed to get the majority of these crimes on tape. While interviewing the victim Heather at the scenic and popular outdoor overlook, named as Lover's Lookout by the locals, the trio were suddenly attacked, and footage clearly shows for the first time a confirmed look at the masked killer in question. In the footage, the killer, dressed in all black and brandishing a hunting knife and white ghost mask, surprised victim Heather and ultimately was able to successfully and fatally wound her with a series of violent stab wounds. And during a confrontation with both Gail Hailstorm and cameraman Kenny, who may have been attempting to intervene, camera footage indicates that the killer pursued both victims into the surrounding wooded area, where police would eventually recover only one of their bodies. Gail Hailstorm was never actually located by police, and it's assumed that, as was the case with other victims in the investigation, the killer might have disposed of or hidden her body elsewhere. Now, the body of Kenny was found stabbed to death along the woodland path, where his camera was also located by police nearby. And using this footage, authorities officially have a solid look at their killer and are able to put out a bolo for the murderer in the surrounding area. But this all-points bulletin issued by police would not help the next victim in the case, though the involvement of the ghost-faced killer would ultimately be unconfirmed in this one. Police were called to a local movie theater after reports of a violent attack and potential murder were called in to 911 dispatch. Now, witnesses here report that during a screening of the then-popular film Shakespeare in Love, the victim, identified as high school student Brenda Meeks, got up from her seat and proceeded to the front of the auditorium, where she reportedly simply collapsed. Now, investigators note that Brenda suffered extensive trauma to her body from what seemed to be numerous stab wounds as well as blunt force trauma. And while witnesses here in the theater claim to have not seen any attack take place of any kind, it's noted that Brenda was extremely outspoken and increasingly verbally agitated and aggressive to her surrounding patrons, which, according to at least one witness, seemed to include a mask-wearing individual who was seen sitting right next to her. Now, unfortunately here, police couldn't actually locate the masked individual, and reports linking them to the murder of Brenda Meeks are largely considered circumstantial due to a lack of solid evidence. But it wouldn't stay that way for long, when the case would come to a crashing conclusion, resulting in 9 additional deaths and the ultimate reveal of the Stevenson County ghost-faced killer. Police were first alerted to the massacre at the Campbell residence by calls from high school teenagers who reportedly had attended a party there. It suggested that at some point during the evening, as the party was seeming to wind down, at least one individual may have seen a masked and armed intruder on the premises, and police waste no time responding to the concerned call. When they arrived on scene, they found what could only be described as a bloodbath. The first victim located by first responders was found in the garage, or more accurately, under the garage door. The high schooler, who was identified in autopsy reports as Tina, was found to have been completely crushed under the mechanical garage door itself, as it seemingly collapsed on top of her body. Now, given the fact that Tina was found crudely wedged into a pet door that was built into the garage, it's suggested by investigators that she likely attempted to escape the killer from within the garage itself. But when the mechanical door was opened at the time of escape, the weight of her body proved too great for the device, and as such, the entire structure simply collapsed on top of her, fatally killing her in the process. And as police proceed inside the property of Cindy Campbell's house, it doesn't take them long to find other victims in the case. Crime scene photographs showcase the first individual, identified as Shorty Meeks, the biological brother of prior victim Brenda Meeks, fatally injured in the front hallway of the home. Now, interestingly here, Shorty was wounded in an MO that does not match the masked killer in the case. He was found to have been shot with a handgun at a range of less than 10 feet, the bullet of which struck his upper torso and collapsed his right lung. Now, in a statement provided to police by a surviving victim, Cindy Campbell, she formally identified her then-boyfriend, Bobby Prinz, as the shooter here. And while Bobby and his alleged secret lover, Ray Wilkins, reportedly verbally claimed responsibility for the murders in the area, these claims would prove to, at least in part, be untrue. See, both Bobby and Ray were found deceased in the home, notably in the kitchen area. Bobby Prinz had been stabbed a total of 16 times, all of which were wounds to his center mass, using what investigators determined was the same knife that Bobby had on his person during his previous arrest by police. Strangely, DNA samples here also found traces of what appeared to be tomato ketchup on some of his clothing, though it's unclear if it was related to his murder. Now, Ray Wilkins was also found on top of Bobby's body, suggesting that they were both killed at the same time and in close proximity and likely collapsed on the spot as a result of their fatal wounds. However, Ray was killed by a different weapon entirely, notably that of a fishing hook, similar to one that would be used in a fishery. Now, there's some important information here in the investigation that draws some seemingly clear distinctions between the alleged killers in the Stevenson County murders. Firstly, the actual killer had never used a gun in the previous killings, and given the fact that Bobby Prinz had done so against victim Shorty Meeks, it suggested that it's unlikely that Bobby was the killer in the prior murders in the case, and that this new crime was simply unrelated. In addition, police would famously find the bodies of 5 additional students in the basement of the Campbell house, all of whom were killed with massive stab trauma or slash wounds determined to have been from a hunting knife and a fishing hook, the very same style of weapons that were used on purported killers Bobby Prinz and Ray Wilkins. So it's suggested then that Ray and Bobby were likely just taking credit for these murders committed previously, and that the real killer, at this point unidentified by police, was still out there somewhere. After a subsequent search of the Campbell home, police located various drugs and narcotics stashed throughout, though interviews with the homeowner, identified as Cindy's biological father, indicated that the killer may have planted the drugs all through the house. At this point, investigators were considering two key suspects in the case, that of Cindy Campbell's father, who investigation notes show was considered a person of interest numerous times in the case due to his sudden departure from town during the murders, as well as a local fisherman, identified as David Keegan. However, both theories here proved to be ultimately unfruitful. Cindy's father was cleared after it was revealed that he had been kidnapped and forcibly confined during the duration of the murders. And David Keegan, while suggested as an antagonist by Cindy Campbell herself due to a known altercation that had taken place a year prior, was found to have already died, and he was buried at the local Lakewood Cemetery in town. And while the actual killer in the case was never formally apprehended, the lead Stevenson County Sheriff would soon make a discovery that would send shockwaves throughout the community. The Stevenson County ghost-faced killer was formally identified as none other than Doofy Gilmore, the acting special constable assigned to the case. Now, police made this discovery and breakthrough after finding Doofy's discarded personal belongings, namely that of a backpack that he often carried with him that was found to contain numerous pieces of damning evidence. This evidence, recorded in police reports, included gloves, a hunting knife, and a white ghost-faced mask, the same one worn by the killer in question. Subsequent DNA testing on the weapon recovered concluded that it was likely the same weapon used in the murders in the area, both through blood samples and wound patterns, confirming police's worst fears that their own deputy constable was the infamous masked killer that terrorized the area. Doofy Gilmore's motives were never actually known, and his whereabouts to this day remain a mystery. It's believed that after the murders concluded, Doofy may have skipped town, fearing his eventual discovery by police. Now, interestingly as well, despite clear and obvious physical representations, medical reports obtained by authorities seem to indicate no intellectual disabilities present with Doofy Gilmore himself, suggesting that, quite disturbingly, the killer may have in fact been faking his disability to absolve himself from any sort of suspicion by police. The case of the Stevenson County killer is considered by many to be a complete botch by local police authorities. And the fact that Doofy Gilmore remained at large despite an exhaustive search created a metaphorical wound that the town would never really formally recover from. The surviving victim, Cindy Campbell, would go on to attend college, where she was rumored to have taken part in the now infamous Hell House research project in the years following the violent events in Stevenson County, though the unknown fate and violent motives of serial killer Doofy Gilmore would leave the Ghostface Killer investigation still a cold case 25 years later. Thanks for listening to our true crime spin on Scary Movie. I knew pretty much right away that I wanted to do some goofy picks for April Fools, and Scary Movie was always the #1 contender for me. I literally can't believe that this movie came out 25 years ago. 25 years! Man, that is wild. Scary Movie was a staple for me growing up, and while Part 2 is still one of my all-time favorite comedies, I made sure to throw an Easter egg in this episode for it. The original still holds up for me, and I quote it with my friends all the time. If you haven't seen it, it's basically a parody of the many then popular horror films like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, and it really takes a tongue-in-cheek approach to the tropes of the genre in general. As over the top as the movie is, I tried to include many of the goofy details and scenes from the film, but played like straight-up true crime facts, and it was admittedly pretty fun to creatively walk that line for this episode. The Scary Movie franchise was a powerhouse success in the 2000s, spawning a total of 5 entries, though honestly, I didn't even realize there was a 5th one. I guess I was kind of burnt out on the franchise by then. Admittedly, they only got worse as the series went on, but apparently there's a new one coming out with the OG cast and crew back on the project. We'll have to see if that's a hit or a miss, but for now, that's going to conclude our coverage of this goofy spoof. Bye, Cindy. We're keeping with the theme of April Fools for the entire month, and next week we're going to tackle a request that I got that fits the theme of something more non-conventional for true crime. Hope you like pizza and animatronics. As always, I'm your host Evan Taggart, and this has been Inside the Mask.